The Galactic High Council chamber buzzed with what could generously be called conversation, though it sounded more like a zoo during feeding time. 12 different species, each convinced they were the pinnacle of evolution, sat around a massive circular table that hovered 3 meters above the polished floor. The air recyclers worked overtime, struggling to accommodate the various atmospheric preferences of beings who breathed everything from methane to pure nitrogen. At the head of this cosmic circus sat Council Leader Vorthak, a towering creature whose species, the Kromnari, had ruled half the galaxy for the past millennium. His forearms gestured dramatically as he spoke, while his 3 eyes rotated independently to observe the room. Today, those eyes held nothing but contempt. So Vorthak's voice rumbled through the chamber's translation matrix, each word dripping with disdain. The humans have finally been granted provisional membership. He paused, letting the words hang in the recycled air like a bad smell. How quaint! A ripple of what passed for laughter echoed from the assembled delegates. The Velkari representative, Ambassador Nexus, leaned forward on her 6 spindly legs. Her translucent blue skin pulsed with amusement. Provisional being the operative word, of course. We must maintain some standards, after all. Standards? Bellowed Gormax, the hulking Thurian delegate whose rock-like exterior made him look like a mountain with anger management issues. These humans barely qualify as sentient. They only achieved faster-than-light travel 50 cycles ago. My youngest hatchling has been alive longer than their entire space program. The Zephyrian ambassador, a graceful being of pure energy contained within a shimmering field, added their contribution with typical Zephyrian smugness. Their technology is adorable, like watching larvae attempt to build a starship from mud and wishful thinking. Vorthak's middle eye focused on a holographic display showing Earth's solar system. Look at this pathetic little backwater. 1 star, 8 planets, and they have managed to barely colonize their own moon. Meanwhile, my species controls 14 star systems and has mastered dimensional engineering. He gestured dismissively with 2 of his arms. They are not even worth the energy it takes to mock them. Oh, but the mocking is half the fun, chimed in Kella, the Astrid delegate whose crystalline form refracted the chamber's lighting into dancing rainbows. Have you seen their delegation request? They are sending a single representative. 1. As if a lone primitive could possibly comprehend the complexities of galactic governance. The chamber erupted in what various species considered laughter. The Thurians made grinding sounds like tectonic plates shifting. The Velkari clicked their mandibles rapidly. The Zephyrians flickered in patterns that somehow conveyed hilarity. Single representative, repeated Vorthak, his voice thick with mock wonder. How delightfully human. No doubt some chest-thumping male specimen convinced he can intimidate us with his, what do they call it, testosterone? The pronunciation of the alien words sent fresh waves of amusement through the council. Ambassador Trelik, representing the Machine Logic Synthesized Collective, spoke in perfectly modulated tones. Analysis indicates humans possess significant biological and psychological weaknesses. They require constant atmospheric pressure regulation, specific temperature ranges, and regular nutrient intake. They also demonstrate irrational emotional responses that cloud logical decision-making processes. Do not forget their laughably short lifespans, added Nexus, her skin now pulsing a deeper blue with what the Velkari considered humor. Barely a century of consciousness, if they are fortunate. I have owned starships older than their oldest living members. Vorthak raised one massive hand, and the chamber fell silent. When the council leader spoke, even the air recyclers seemed to quiet down. The amusing truth, my fellow delegates, is that we have granted them this provisional membership purely for entertainment value. Think of it as a cosmic comedy show. We will watch them stumble through their first diplomatic encounters, make embarrassing cultural mistakes, and eventually realize they are swimming in an ocean far too deep for their primitive minds. Will we at least provide them with translation assistance? Asked Chilla, her crystalline form sparkling with what might have been mischief. Or shall we let them flounder in linguistic confusion as well? Oh, we will provide the basics, Vorthak replied, his three eyes gleaming with predatory satisfaction. Just enough rope for them to hang themselves with, as their own saying goes. Let them think they understand what is happening. The eventual realization of their complete inadequacy will be all the more educational. Gormax's boulder-like features arranged themselves into what passed for a grin among Thurians. I almost feel sorry for whatever poor fool they send. Imagine the humiliation when they realize they are completely outmatched by species that achieved interstellar civilization while their ancestors were still climbing trees. Almost sorry, agreed Nexus, but not quite. After all, every species must learn their place in the galactic hierarchy. Better they learn it now, before they develop delusions of actual importance. The Zephyrian ambassador pulsed with anticipation. When does this entertainment begin? I confess I am quite looking forward to observing primitive human cognitive patterns under stress. Vorthak checked the chronometer display hovering beside his chair. Their representative arrives in 3 standard cycles. I suggest we all prepare our best diplomatic faces. He paused, and his 3 eyes somehow managed to convey a smile despite the Krumnari lack of traditional facial features. Though I suspect maintaining composure while watching their inevitable failure will prove challenging. As the council members began discussing logistics and preparing for what they assumed would be an amusing diversion, none of them noticed the small monitoring probe that had been silently recording every word. None of them considered that perhaps, just perhaps, they might be the ones providing the entertainment. After all, what could a single human possibly do to surprise them? 3 cycles later, the great doors of the Galactic High Council chamber hissed open with all the ceremonial pomp befitting the arrival of a new species representative. The assembled delegates straightened in their respective seating arrangements, multiple eyes, sensory organs, and consciousness fields focusing on the entrance. They expected spectacle. They expected intimidation. They expected some hulking human specimen trying desperately to project strength and importance. What they got was Captain Maya Torres. She walked through those massive doors like she owned the place, which was the first surprise. The second surprise was harder to ignore. Where her left arm should have been, there was simply nothing. An empty sleeve pinned neatly to her dark blue diplomatic uniform. The silence that followed could have been bottled and sold as a weapon. Vorthak's 3 eyes performed an involuntary dance of confusion, each one trying to process what they were seeing independently. His translator matrix actually stuttered for a moment before managing to convert his thoughts into words. This is your representative. Maya Torres stopped precisely in the center of the chamber, her single hand clasped behind her back in a pose that somehow managed to look more military than diplomatic. She looked up at the towering council leader with the kind of smile that made smart people nervous and stupid people overconfident. Captain Maya Torres, Earth Diplomatic Corps. And yes, before anyone asks, I am indeed missing the arm. Gold star for observation skills. The Velkari delegate, Nexus, actually clicked her mandibles in what could charitably be called shock. Her translucent skin shifted from blue to a confused purple-green. They sent a damaged one. Are there no intact humans available for such an important occasion? Oh, there are plenty of intact humans, Maya replied, her tone carrying just enough edge to cut glass. But they figured I was the most qualified for dealing with challenging personalities. She gestured with her remaining arm toward the assembled council. Something about my experience managing difficult situations with limited resources. Gormax, the mountain-sized Thurian, leaned forward so far his rocky exterior actually creaked. Limited resources indeed. How do you even function with such an obvious deficiency? Do your people not possess medical technology to repair such damage? Maya's smile widened, and somehow that made it more dangerous rather than friendlier. We do, actually. Fascinating technology. But I chose to keep it this way. She paused, letting that sink in. Reminds me that adaptation is more valuable than perfection. Chose to keep it. Kella's crystalline form actually flickered with what appeared to be malfunction. You voluntarily remain broken? Broken is such an interesting word choice, Maya mused, walking closer to the floating council table. I prefer streamlined. Less baggage to carry around, you might say. The Zephyrian ambassador pulsed with what their species considered incredulous amusement. Surely even humans cannot be so primitive as to consider physical damage an advantage. This defies all logical evolutionary principles. Evolution is full of surprises, Maya said cheerfully. Take the Zephyrians, for example. All that energy, all that consciousness, and yet somehow you still need a containment field to interact with solid matter. Some might call that limiting. The energy being's containment field actually flickered with what could only be described as a fence. That is entirely different. Our energy form represents the pinnacle of consciousness development. Of course it does, Maya agreed with the kind of patronizing tone usually reserved for explaining simple concepts to children. And I am sure the need for artificial containment to avoid dissipating into the void has absolutely nothing to do with fundamental design flaws. Orthox middle eye narrowed to focus entirely on this infuriating human. You speak boldly for a representative of a species that has achieved practically nothing of galactic significance. What could humans possibly offer to this council? Maya Torres tilted her head slightly, a gesture that somehow managed to convey both innocence and predatory interest. Well, for starters, we could offer perspective. Fresh eyes, as we say. Sometimes it takes an outsider to notice things that long-established, shall we say, traditional thinkers might miss. Such as? Demanded Trelik, the synthesized collective representative. What could primitive biological organisms possibly observe that our advanced analytical capabilities have not already processed and categorized? Such as the fact that this entire council operates on assumptions that are about as stable as a house of cards in a windstorm, Maya replied with devastating casualness. But hey, I am sure 12 species who have been doing things the same way for centuries would never benefit from questioning their methods. The chamber erupted in various sounds of indignation. Mandible clicking, energy field fluctuations, grinding stone noises, and atmospheric pressure changes that indicated serious alien displeasure. Through it all, Maya Torres stood perfectly calm, her single hand still clasped behind her back, that dangerous smile never wavering. Nexus's skin had cycled through several colors before settling on an angry orange. This insolence is precisely what we expected from such a primitive species. Do you have any idea who you are addressing? A bunch of very old, very set in their ways individuals who seem to confuse age with wisdom and tradition with effectiveness, Maya answered promptly. Did I miss anything important? Gormax actually stood up, his massive form casting a shadow across half the chamber. You dare insult the Galactic High Council? Your species has existed for mere moments compared to our civilizations. And yet, when, Maya said, looking up at the towering Thurian without a trace of intimidation, here I am, representing a species you consider beneath notice in your most sacred political chamber. And somehow none of you seem able to figure out why Earth would send a one-armed diplomat to such an important gathering. She paused, letting that question hang in the recycled air like a challenge. Maybe that should tell you something about who the real primitives are in this room. The silence that followed was different from the first one. This one had teeth. Vorthak decided that allowing this insolent human to continue speaking freely was becoming counterproductive to his image of supreme authority. He activated the holographic displays around the chamber, filling the air with complex star charts, resource allocation matrices, making trade route calculations that would make a quantum computer weep. Enough philosophical banter, he declared, his forearms manipulating the displays with practiced efficiency. Let us proceed to actual business. The Kepler Mining Consortium requires mediation for their latest territorial dispute. He gestured toward a three-dimensional map showing 17 star systems, each pulsing with different colored indicators. 5 species have competing claims to the trilithium deposits in the Kepler 442 system. This dispute has been ongoing for 6 cycles, and resolution requires sophisticated understanding of interspecies economics. Maya Torres examined the holographic display with her single hand stroking her chin thoughtfully. The aliens watched her with barely concealed anticipation. Here was their first real test of human intellectual capacity, and they fully expected to watch her flounder like a fish on dry land. Fascinating problem, Maya mused, walking around the display to examine it from different angles. So we have the Thurians claiming mining rights based on first discovery, the Valkyrie asserting historical precedents, the Astrid demanding access based on their advanced extraction technology, the Zephyrians wanting energy harvesting privileges, and the synthesized collective arguing for logical resource distribution. Did I summarize that correctly? Nexus actually looked impressed, despite herself. You absorbed the basic parameters quite rapidly for a, well, yes. Those are the competing claims. And the current stalemate exists because each species refuses to compromise, since any concession would set a precedent for future disputes, Maya continued, still circling the display. Meanwhile, the trilithium remains unharvested, and everyone loses money while lawyers, arbitrators get rich. Gormax rumbled his approval. At least the human grasps the surface complexity. However, resolution requires delicate balance of competing interests that takes into account centuries of legal precedent and interspecies relationship dynamics. Oh, absolutely, Maya agreed with enthusiastic sincerity. Super complicated. Incredibly delicate. Definitely requires the kind of sophisticated thinking that only comes from centuries of experience. Something in her tone made Kella's crystalline form flicker nervously. You sound as though you have a solution? Well, not a solution exactly, Maya said with false modesty. More like an observation. She stopped walking and faced the council directly. You are all thinking about this wrong. The translation systems throughout the chamber actually seemed to hiccup at the sheer audacity of that statement. A primitive human telling the Galactic High Council they were thinking incorrectly about something. Vorthak's 3 eyes narrowed to pinpoints. Enlighten us, Captain Torres. How exactly are beings with millennia of diplomatic experience thinking incorrectly? Maya's smile could have powered a small starship. You are treating this like a zero-sum game when it is actually a coordination problem masquerading as a resource dispute. Explain, demanded Trillic, his mechanical sensors focusing entirely on the human. Gladly, Maya replied, walking back to the holographic display. The Thurians want mining rights, but their extraction technology is slow and environmentally damaging. The Valkyrie want historical recognition, but they lack the infrastructure for large-scale operations. The Astrid have amazing technology but need rare earth elements they do not possess. The Zephyrians want energy but cannot physically interact with solid matter extraction. And the collective wants logical efficiency but lacks the biological intuition necessary for geological survey work. She paused, letting them follow her reasoning. You have been fighting over who gets to dig holes in the ground, when what you really have is 5 species who each possess exactly one piece of a perfect mining operation puzzle. The chamber fell silent except for the humming of various life support systems. Nexus was the first to speak, her skin cycling through colors of confusion. You suggest cooperation? I suggest you stop being idiots and start being profitable, Maya replied cheerfully. Joint venture. Thurians provide legal legitimacy and labor force. Valkyrie provide historical knowledge and established trade routes. Astrid provide extraction technology. Zephyrians provide power systems. Collective provides operational logistics and efficiency analysis. Gormax leaned forward, his rocky features showing genuine interest for the first time. And profit distribution? Equal partnership, rotating leadership based on operational phase requirements, with bonus allocations tied to performance metrics rather than species politics. Maya shrugged her single shoulder. You all make money, the trilithium gets harvested efficiently, and nobody has to waste another 6 cycles arguing about whose ancestors discovered what first. The Zephyrian ambassador pulsed with what appeared to be analytical confusion. This approach completely disregards traditional territorial sovereignty principles. Traditional territorial sovereignty principles are why you have been sitting here for 6 cycles watching money evaporate into legal fees, Maya pointed out with devastating logic. But hey, if you prefer bureaucratic purity over actual results, who am I to judge? Kella's crystalline form flickered rapidly as she processed the implications. The precedent this would set, it could revolutionize how we handle resource disputes. Revolutionary. Exactly what we need, Maya agreed. Because clearly the current system is working so well that 5 advanced civilizations cannot figure out how to dig holes in the ground without starting an intergalactic legal crisis. Vorthak found himself in the extremely uncomfortable position of actually considering a proposal from a species he had dismissed as primitive only moments earlier. Worse, the proposal was logical, efficient, profitable. The complexity of implementing such a cooperative structure would require extensive legal framework development, he said, grasping for objections. Sure would, Maya nodded agreeably. Probably take about 2 cycles to set up properly. Meanwhile, you could have preliminary operations running within half a cycle using provisional agreements. Start making money immediately while the lawyers work out the fine print. Trellick's mechanical mind was already running calculations. Projected efficiency gains would exceed 340% compared to single-species operations. Profit margins would increase exponentially. But this requires trust between species that have been competitors for centuries, Nexus protested, though her objections sounded weak even to her own auditory receptors. Maya Torres looked around the chamber with that infuriating smile still firmly in place. Trust. Right. Because clearly the current system of mutual suspicion and endless litigation is so much more reliable. She gestured toward the holographic display with her single arm. The funny thing about this whole dispute? Each of you has been so focused on preventing the others from getting an advantage that you have all guaranteed nobody gets anything. Meanwhile, an entire star system full of valuable resources sits there completely untouched, laughing at the supposed intellectual superiority of galactic civilization. The silence that followed was no longer confused or angry. It was thoughtful, calculating. And for the first time since Maya Torres had walked through those chamber doors, it contained the faint but unmistakable sound of alien minds changing, which somehow was far more unsettling than their previous arrogance had been. The relative peace of the council chamber was shattered exactly 18 hours later when emergency klaxons began wailing throughout the station. Emergency lighting bathed everything in pulsing red, and the translation matrix crackled with urgent communications from across the galaxy. Vorthak materialized in the chamber faster than Maya had thought possible for something his size, his 3 eyes already focused on the incoming data streams. Council emergency session. All representatives report immediately. Within minutes, the chamber filled with agitated alien delegates, their various atmospheric requirements creating a symphony of hissing life support systems. Maya Torres walked in last, appearing remarkably calm for someone whose species had just gained front-row seats to their first galactic crisis. The situation is critical, Vorthak announced without preamble, activating holographic displays that showed 2 massive fleets facing each other across the Rigel sector. The Hegemony Alliance has declared war against the United Systems coalition. Full military mobilization is underway. Maya studied the tactical displays with professional interest. The Hegemony fleet consisted primarily of massive Thurian dreadnoughts and Astrid crystal ships, while the coalition forces were dominated by Zephyrian energy platforms and synthesized collective drone swarms. Both sides had brought enough firepower to glass entire worlds. Preliminary casualty projections exceed 12 billion sentients, Trellick reported in his characteristic emotionless tone. Economic disruption will affect 47 systems. This conflict requires immediate resolution. Gormax, representing the Thurian interests in the hegemony, rumbled with barely contained aggression. The coalition has violated 17 territorial agreements and stolen resources from sovereign hegemony worlds. We demand complete surrender and reparations. The Zephyrian ambassador pulsed with indignant energy. Stolen resources? The hegemony has been systematically excluding energy-based life forms from trade negotiations for decades. We demand equal representation and access to energy-rich systems. Both sides have legitimate grievances, Nexus interjected, her skin cycling through stressed colors. However, military resolution will devastate both factions and destabilize the entire galactic economy. Vorthak's attention suddenly focused on Maya with an intensity that made the air recyclers hum nervously. This presents an opportunity for humanity to prove their worth to galactic civilization. Both factions require additional military assets. Earth's naval forces, while primitive, could provide adequate cannon fodder for either side. Maya raised an eyebrow. Cannon fodder? How flattering. Think of it as a learning experience, Kella suggested, her crystalline form sparkling with what might have been humor. Human forces could gain valuable combat experience while supporting more advanced military operations. Let me make sure I understand this correctly, Maya said, walking closer to the tactical displays. You want my species to throw our ships and personnel into a meat grinder between two factions that have enough firepower to sterilize solar systems, and because it might be educational? The hegemony offers favorable trade agreements in exchange for human military support, Gormax declared. Your species would benefit significantly from aligning with the winning side. The coalition offers technology transfers and energy access rights, the Zephyrian countered. Far more valuable than hegemony promises. Both offers are generous considering human military capabilities, Vorthak added with diplomatic condescension. Your fleets would play supporting roles, naturally. Nothing too dangerous for such inexperienced crews. Maya Torres stood silently for a long moment, studying the holographic battle formations with her single hand clasped behind her back. The assembled aliens watched her with expressions ranging from expectant greed to barely concealed amusement. Here was their chance to see exactly how primitive human strategic thinking really was. You know what? Maya said finally, her voice carrying that dangerous edge the Council was beginning to recognize. I have a counter-proposal. Oh, this should be entertaining, Nexus muttered, her skin shifting to an amused blue. Instead of choosing sides in your mutual destruction festival, Maya continued, how about Earth mediates this conflict? The chamber erupted in various alien sounds of disbelief, mandible clicking, stone grinding, energy fluctuations, and atmospheric pressure changes that indicated species-wide incredulity. Mediate? Gormax's rocky features arranged themselves into what passed for a sneer. Humans mediate between civilizations that achieved interstellar warfare while your ancestors were discovering fire. Exactly, Maya replied cheerfully. Fresh perspective, remember? You said it yourselves. We are too primitive to understand your sophisticated thinking. Which means we might actually see solutions you have overlooked. Trellick's sensors focused entirely on the human. Explain your proposed mediation strategy. Simple, Maya said, gesturing toward the tactical displays. Both sides stop shooting at each other and start shooting at the real problem. The silence that followed could have been harvested and sold as a new form of energy. Vorthak's three eyes performed their confusion dance again. What real problem? The conflict parameters are clearly defined. Territorial disputes, resource allocation, representation disagreements. Those are symptoms, Maya interrupted. The real problem is that you have two massive military-industrial complexes that have been building weapons for centuries with no actual enemies to fight. So they created enemies out of trade disputes and political disagreements because the alternative was admitting they had wasted trillions of credits on toys they did not need. The Zephyrian ambassador flickered with what appeared to be offense. Our military preparations are entirely justified by historical conflicts and security requirements. Sure they are, Maya agreed with that infuriating smile. That is why both fleets are perfectly matched in terms of firepower, equipped with weapons specifically designed to counter each other's technologies, and commanded by officers who have been war-gaming against each other for decades. Pure coincidence. She walked around the holographic display, pointing out details with casual expertise. Look at these formations. Classic textbook maneuvers, both sides. No innovation, no adaptation, no creative thinking. Just two groups of very expensive toy soldiers following very predictable patterns. Kella's crystalline form flickered nervously. You suggest this entire conflict is artificial? I suggest this entire conflict is a jobs program for people who make weapons and the officers who use them, Maya replied bluntly. The real question is what happens to all that military hardware and personnel when they realize fighting each other is incredibly expensive and accomplishes exactly nothing. Gormax leaned forward menacingly. Are you implying that theory and military traditions are meaningless exercises? I am implying that theory and military traditions are about to get very real experience against targets that actually fight back, Maya said, manipulating the holographic controls with surprising skill. The display shifted to show the outer galactic rim, where red warning indicators pulsed ominously. Because while you have been building fleets to fight each other, the Void Hunters have been building fleets to fight everybody. The chamber fell silent, except for the humming of life support systems and the occasional beep of incoming data streams. The Void Hunters are contained beyond the galactic barrier, Nexus protested, though her skin had shifted to a worried purple. They have not been active for 3 centuries. They have not been active where you could see them, Maya corrected. But long-range sensor data shows massive fleet movements in the outer darkness. Ships the size of moons. Weapons that make your dreadnoughts look like children's toys. She gestured toward the tactical display showing the 2 fleets preparing for battle. So here is my mediation proposal. Stop wasting time and resources fighting each other over trade routes and energy rights. Combine your fleets, pool your technologies, and prepare for the fight that actually matters. Trelic's mechanical mind was already processing implications. Joint fleet operations between traditional enemies would require unprecedented cooperation protocols. Unprecedented cooperation against unprecedented threats, Maya agreed. Unless, of course, you prefer to maintain your sophisticated military traditions right up until the moment the Void Hunters arrive and demonstrate what real warfare looks like. She paused, letting that image sink in. But hey, what do I know? I am just a primitive human with 1 arm and apparently no understanding of galactic complexity. The silence that followed was no longer confused or thoughtful. It was calculating. And for the first time since Maya Torres had entered their chamber, the assembled delegates were beginning to suspect that maybe, just maybe, they had severely underestimated exactly what kind of game they were playing. The emergency session continued for another 6 hours, during which Maya Torres systematically demolished every assumption the Galactic High Council had about human capabilities, the galactic politics, and their own supposed superiority. But it was not until Vorthak called for a recess that the real bombshell dropped. Captain Torres, the council leader said with barely concealed frustration, your proposals require verification through our intelligence networks. We cannot simply accept human claims about Void Hunter activity without independent confirmation. Maya's smile could have cut through titanium plating. Oh, you will get your confirmation. In fact, you should be receiving it right about now. As if summoned by her words, the chamber's communication systems erupted with incoming messages. Priority alerts flooded the displays, each one carrying verification codes that made Vorthak's 3 eyes widen with genuine alarm. Incoming diplomatic communique from the Solari Confederation announced the chamber's artificial intelligence, Priority Alpha, requesting immediate emergency council session. Nexus's skin shifted to a confused yellow-green. The Solari? But they are barely considered a minor species. Why would they request emergency status? Incoming diplomatic communique from the Terran Exchange Cooperative, the AI continued relentlessly. Priority Alpha, requesting immediate emergency council session. The Terran Exchange? Kella's crystalline form flickered with bewilderment. They are primarily a trading organization. What could they possibly? Incoming diplomatic communique from the United Mining Guilds, the AI announced. Priority Alpha, requesting immediate emergency council session. Gormax's rocky features were beginning to show genuine concern. The mining guilds represent dozens of species we have never even bothered to catalog. Why are they suddenly? Incoming diplomatic communique from the Independent Worlds Alliance. Incoming diplomatic communique from the Outer Rim Collective. Incoming diplomatic communique from the Free Traders Coalition. Incoming diplomatic communique from. Maya raised her single hand, and somehow that simple gesture carried enough authority to make the AI pause its recitation. I think they get the idea. The chamber had fallen completely silent, except for the continuous beeping of incoming priority messages. Vorthak's three eyes were now focused entirely on Maya Torres with an intensity that made the air recyclers sound like whimpering animals. "What," he said in a voice that could have frozen liquid hydrogen, "exactly is happening here?" Maya Torres walked to the center of the chamber, her single hand clasped behind her back in that deceptively casual pose that the council was beginning to associate with very bad news for their peace of mind. "What is happening?" she said, with the kind of cheerful tone people use to announce surprise parties. "Is that you are about to receive formal diplomatic requests from 47 species and organizations that you have spent centuries dismissing as too primitive, too small, or too irrelevant to matter." She gestured toward the still blinking communication displays. "The Solari Confederation, for example. Tiny species, barely 3 systems, no significant military power. Except they happen to control the most efficient hyperspace relay network in the Outer Rim. Funny thing about hyperspace relays, they make communication and coordination across vast distances incredibly easy. Trellick's mechanical sensors were now performing rapid calculations." "You are suggesting systematic coordination between minor species groups?" "I am not suggesting anything," Maya replied sweetly. "I am telling you that while you have been busy playing sophisticated political games with each other, humanity has been building relationships with every species you considered beneath your notice." Nexus's skin was cycling through colors so rapidly she looked like a living mood ring having a nervous breakdown. "But these species have no significant resources, no advanced technology, no representation on the Galactic High Council," Maya finished for her. "No voice in major decisions, no say in policies that affect their worlds, and absolutely no reason to support a system that treats them like cosmic furniture." Kella's crystalline form was flickering erratically. "You are describing a coalition of the dismissed." "I prefer alliance of the overlooked," Maya said thoughtfully. "It has a nicer ring to it, do not you think?" Vorthak's voice carried the kind of controlled fury usually reserved for natural disasters. "You orchestrated this. The trade negotiations, the military mediation proposals, everything. This was planned." "Planned is such a strong word," Maya mused, examining her fingernails with elaborate casualness. "Anticipated might be more accurate. You see, humans have this interesting habit of studying systems before we try to change them. And the Galactic High Council, well, it is quite a system." She began walking around the chamber again, but this time her movement carried the predatory grace of someone who held all the cards and was enjoying the reveal. 12 species, representing less than 30% of known galactic civilization, making decisions for everyone else. A council that grants provisional membership to new species but never actually promotes them to full voting status. A system where economic and military power determines political influence, creating a permanent underclass of minor worlds and species. Gormax leaned forward menacingly. "Those arrangements exist for good reasons. Order requires hierarchy. Stability demands leadership." "Order and stability," Maya agreed, nodding enthusiastically. "Absolutely crucial. Which is why it is so interesting that your stable, orderly system is about to face the largest political realignment in galactic history." She stopped walking and faced the council directly. "The trade negotiation I proposed earlier. That was not just about trilithium mining. That was a proof of concept demonstrating that cooperation between diverse species produces better results than competitive hierarchy." The mining guilds were taking notes. The communication systems continued their relentless beeping of incoming priority messages. "The military mediation I suggested? That was not just about stopping a war. That was about demonstrating that artificial conflicts serve the interests of military-industrial complexes rather than actual security needs." The Independent Worlds Alliance was taking notes. Maya's smile was now approaching weapons-grade intensity. And my proposal to prepare for the Void Hunter threat? That was not just about external enemies. That was about proving that the current power structure is fundamentally incapable of responding to existential challenges because it is too invested in maintaining its own authority. Vorthak's three eyes were performing calculations that his species' brain had never been designed to handle. You are threatening to destabilize galactic civilization. I am offering to save galactic civilization, Maya corrected gently, from itself. The Zephyrian ambassador pulsed with what could only be described as panic. This is madness. You cannot simply reorganize thousands of years of established political order. Watch me, Maya said with devastating simplicity. She activated her personal communication device, and suddenly the chamber filled with holographic displays showing star maps, fleet positions, resource allocation charts, and diplomatic networks that spanned the entire galaxy. But these were not the neat, orderly displays the Council was used to seeing. These showed a different galaxy entirely, one where humanity sat at the center of a vast web of alliances, trade agreements, and mutual defense pacts with species the Council had never considered important enough to notice. 47 species, Maya announced, her voice carrying across the chamber with military precision. Representing over 60% of galactic manufacturing capacity, 70% of raw material production, and 80% of the transportation networks that keep civilization running. The numbers appeared on the displays in stark, undeniable clarity, all united under a simple principle: that governance should serve the governed, not the governors. That decisions affecting everyone should be made by everyone. That maybe, just maybe, the species that actually do the work of keeping civilization running should have a say in how civilization is managed. Nexus's skin had settled on a pale, shocked white. This is impossible. The economic disruption alone would be minimal, Maya interrupted, because the Alliance of the Overlooked has been coordinating their economic activities for months. Supply chains remain intact. Trade continues. The only thing that changes is who gets to make the big decisions. She paused, letting that sink in. Of course, the current council members are welcome to join the new arrangement. All they have to do is accept that their automatic authority over other species is coming to an end. The silence that followed was not thoughtful or calculating. It was the silence of beings who suddenly realized they had been playing checkers while their opponent had been playing four-dimensional chess, and losing. Badly. Vorthak rose from his ceremonial chair with all four arms extended, his three eyes blazing with fury that could have powered a small star. The massive Krumnari leader towered over the chamber, casting shadows that seemed to reach across space itself. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of a species that had ruled galaxies since before most civilizations had discovered fire. Enough, he declared, and the word hit the chamber like a physical force. This mockery ends here. I invoke the right of challenge under Article 7 of the Galactic Compact. This council will not be usurped by the scheming of a damaged primitive and her collection of cosmic rabble. Maya Torres looked up at the towering alien with the kind of expression people wear when they have been waiting for exactly this moment their entire lives. The right of challenge, she mused, her voice carrying just enough satisfaction to make smart beings nervous. How wonderfully traditional. I accept. The chamber erupted in various alien sounds of shock. The right of challenge had not been invoked in over 4 centuries, and never by a council member against a representative of a provisional species. It was the ultimate expression of political authority, a formal duel where leadership of the council itself was at stake. Nexus's skin cycled through colors of bewilderment. Captain Torres, do you understand what you have just accepted? The right of challenge is a contest of absolute authority. The winner claims leadership of the Galactic High Council. The loser, well, there are no losers, because losers do not survive. Oh, I understand perfectly, Maya replied, walking to the center of the chamber with that dangerous smile firmly in place. Vorthak just challenged a one-armed human to a contest that will determine who leads galactic civilization. This should be fun. Kella's crystalline form flickered rapidly with what appeared to be panic. This is madness. Humans have no experience with the complexities of the challenge protocols. The contest involves not just political maneuvering, but strategic thinking, resource management, coalition building. Coalition building, Maya interrupted thoughtfully. How interesting. Tell me, Vorthak, under traditional challenge rules, each participant gets to demonstrate their qualifications for leadership through a series of tests, correct? Vorthak's three eyes narrowed with predatory satisfaction. 5 tests. Political acumen, strategic planning, resource allocation, crisis management, and ultimate authority demonstration. The Council votes after each test. First to win 3 tests claims the crown, and each participant can call upon their allies and resources during the tests, obviously. Leadership requires the ability to inspire loyalty and command resources. What allies could a primitive species possibly? He stopped speaking as the chamber's communication systems erupted in a cacophony of incoming signals. The holographic displays filled with incoming vessels, diplomatic credentials, and formal declarations of support. Ships bearing the insignia of 47 different species were approaching the council station, their captains requesting permission to observe the challenge proceedings. "Oh, those allies," Maya said sweetly. Gormax leaned forward, his rocky features showing genuine concern for the first time. This violates challenge protocols. Minor species have no standing to participate in council leadership contests. Actually, Maya replied, producing a data pad from her uniform pocket. According to Article 12, Section 4 of the original Galactic Compact, any species with formal diplomatic representation can participate in challenge proceedings if they possess relevant expertise. She activated the pad, and legal text appeared on the chamber's displays in 17 different alien languages. The Solari Confederation has expertise in communication networks. The mining guilds have expertise in resource extraction and allocation. The Independent Worlds Alliance has expertise in crisis management and conflict resolution. Shall I continue? Trellick's mechanical sensors were already analyzing the legal documentation. The citations are correct. These species do possess formal diplomatic credentials and demonstrated expertise in relevant areas. But impossible, Vorthak snarled. Minor species cannot simply claim expertise and demand participation in. Council leader Vorthak, Maya interrupted with the kind of polite tone that made experienced diplomats reach for weapons. Are you suggesting that the traditions and laws of the Galactic Compact should be ignored when they become inconvenient for you? The question hung in the chamber's recycled air like a trap waiting to be sprung. If Vorthak accepted the minor species' participation, he would be facing a coalition that controlled most of the galaxy's actual infrastructure. If he rejected their participation, he would be violating the sacred laws he claimed to represent, undermining his own authority in front of the entire council. Maya Torres had just cornered the leader of galactic civilization using his own rules against him. The challenge begins now, Vorthak declared, his voice carrying the kind of controlled fury that preceded volcanic eruptions. First test, political acumen. Each participant must demonstrate their ability to build consensus among diverse factions with competing interests. Excellent, Maya replied, activating her communication device. Attention all allied species representatives. Please transmit your formal declarations of unified support for restructured galactic governance based on proportional representation rather than hierarchical authority. The chamber filled with incoming transmissions as 47 different species simultaneously submitted identical policy proposals, each one crafted to their specific cultural and political requirements but unified in their support for Maya's vision of galactic democracy. Vorthak stared at the displays with the expression of someone watching their carefully constructed world collapse in real time. This is impossible. Building such consensus requires months of negotiation, careful cultural considerations, individual species requirements. Which we completed 3 months ago, Maya said helpfully. While you were busy being sophisticated and superior, we were actually working. The council voted. Maya won the first test unanimously, except for Vorthak's own vote. Second test, strategic planning, Vorthak announced, his voice now carrying the desperation of someone who had just realized they were fighting for their political life. Each participant must present a comprehensive strategy for addressing the current military crisis between the hegemony and coalition forces. Maya activated the holographic displays, showing detailed fleet positions, supply lines, and tactical assessments that made the Council's previous military analyses look like children's drawings. Joint Human-Allied Task Force operations, she announced. Combined hegemony coalition fleets under unified command structure, supported by allied species logistics networks, that's positioned to intercept incoming Void Hunter advanced scouts currently massing at coordinates. She rattled off stellar positions with the precision of someone who had been tracking enemy movements for months. Advanced scouts? The Zephyrian ambassador pulsed with alarm. What advanced scouts? The ones your intelligence services missed because they were too busy monitoring each other instead of watching the actual threats, Maya replied with devastating casualness. Allied species monitoring networks detected them 6 weeks ago. We have been preparing ever since. The vote was not even close. Maya won the second test with only Vorthak and Gormax dissenting. This is a farce. Vorthak roared, his massive form trembling with rage. You manipulated these circumstances. You planned this entire scenario. Yes, Maya agreed with that infuriating smile. I did. Funny thing about being dismissed as primitive and irrelevant, it gives you plenty of time to observe, plan and prepare while everyone else assumes you are too stupid to matter. She walked closer to the towering Kromnari leader, and somehow her presence filled the chamber despite her small size and missing arm. You want to know the real difference between humans and the rest of you? You see our missing pieces and assume we are broken. We see our missing pieces and learn to adapt. You see our limitations and count us out. We see our limitations and find ways around them. She gestured toward her empty sleeve. I lost this arm in a transport accident when I was 12 years old. Spent 2 years learning to do everything with one hand that most people do with two. You know what that teaches you? That the standard way of doing things is not the only way. That adaptation is stronger than perfection. Underestimation is the greatest weapon anyone can give you. Vorthak was breathing heavily, his 3 eyes fixed on Maya with something approaching fear. You want to know why Earth sent a one-armed diplomat to represent humanity? Because I am exactly what you needed to see. Someone you would automatically dismiss. Someone whose obvious deficiency would make you feel superior and confident. Someone you would never consider a threat until it was far too late. She raised her single hand, and the chamber fell silent. I claim leadership of the Galactic High Council by right of challenge victory, with the support of 60% of known galactic civilization, and the unanimous consent of species who actually keep this galaxy running. The silence that followed was absolute. And when the Council voted, there was only one dissenting voice. 6 months later, Nexus sat in what had once been her prestigious council chamber, watching the morning briefings with a mixture of fascination and lingering disbelief. Her skin had settled into a permanent shade of thoughtful blue-green, the Valkyrie equivalent of someone who had experienced a profound philosophical revelation and was still processing the implications. The chamber itself had changed dramatically. Where once 12 species had sat in elevated positions looking down upon supplicants, now representatives from nearly 200 different civilizations occupied a vast circular amphitheater. The old hierarchical seating arrangement had been replaced with something Maya Torres called democratic chaos, with a system where speaking order was determined by expertise relevance rather than political authority. And somehow, impossibly, it actually worked. A daily report from the Kepler Mining Consortium announced the chamber's AI, its voice carrying notes of what almost sounded like satisfaction. Trilithium extraction exceeded projections by 47%. All 5 partner species report record profits and 0 labor disputes. Nexus's mandibles clicked with involuntary amusement. The mining operation that had been deadlocked for 6 cycles was now the most successful joint venture in galactic history. Maya's ridiculous. cooperation model had generated more wealth in 6 months than the previous century of competitive extraction had managed. Military update. The AI continued. Joint Hegemony Coalition forces report successful interdiction of Void Hunter advance scouts at the Galactic Rim. Enemy fleet elements retreated after encountering unified resistance. No Allied casualties reported. Gormax, who had retained his position as military liaison despite his initial opposition, rumbled with what passed for satisfied approval among Thurians. The former enemies were now fighting side by side so effectively that the dreaded Void Hunters had decided to look elsewhere for easier prey. Apparently, cooperation really was more effective than competition when facing existential threats. Economic report. The AI announced with what could charitably be called smugness. Galactic trade volume increased by 89% over previous cycle. Transport efficiency up 63%. Resource allocation disputes down 94%. Kella's crystalline form sparkled with what appeared to be rueful admiration. I have been analyzing the statistical improvements she announced to no one in particular. Every measurable indicator of galactic civilization has improved since the restructuring. Economic growth, military effectiveness, technological innovation, diplomatic resolution success rates, everything. Trellick, whose synthesized collective had adapted to the new order with characteristic mechanical efficiency, processed the data with audible satisfaction. Hypothesis confirmed, hierarchical authority structures create systemic inefficiencies that compound over time. Democratic consensus models with expertise-based decision allocation produce superior outcomes across all measurable parameters. In other words, Nexus translated for the benefit of her own understanding, we were doing everything wrong, and the primitive humans fixed it in 6 months. The irony was not lost on any of them. Maya Torres entered the chamber as she always did, walking through the main entrance like any other representative, rather than materializing in some dramatic display of authority. Her single arm was clasped behind her back in that pose they had all learned to associate with incoming policy changes that would make their lives better whether they liked it or not. Morning briefing, she announced cheerfully, taking her position at the center of the amphitheater. And not above the other representatives, Nexus noted, among them. We have 17 resource allocation requests, 3 territorial mediation proposals, and 1 species requesting admission to the Alliance. She paused, scanning the assembled representatives with that smile that had become the unofficial symbol of the new Galactic Order. Oh, and the Kromnari hegemony has submitted a formal application to rejoin the Council under the new democratic protocols. A ripple of various alien sounds indicated surprise, amusement, and in some cases vindictive satisfaction. Vorthak had spent the past 6 months in what humans apparently called exile, and, though it was more accurately described as a very long time to think about where his assumptions had led him. Their application includes a personal message from former Council leader Vorthak, Maya continued, activating a holographic display. He wishes to formally apologize for his previous dismissive attitude toward minor species and requests an opportunity to contribute to galactic governance under the new cooperative framework. Nexus found herself genuinely impressed. The massive Kromnari leader admitting error and requesting permission to participate in a system he had once commanded? That represented a level of personal growth that most species achieved only over geological timescales. Motion to accept their application? Maya asked the assembly. The vote was unanimous. As the morning session continued, Nexus found herself reflecting on the strange journey that had brought them to this point. 6 months ago, they had been the sophisticated leaders of galactic civilization, secure in their superiority and confident in their methods. They had looked at a one-armed human and seen weakness, primitive thinking, and comic relief. Now that same human sat at the center of a governmental system that had revolutionized galactic civilization, eliminated interspecies conflicts, and created the most prosperous and stable period in recorded history. The broken representative had not just succeeded, she had succeeded so completely that their previous methods looked like the confused stumbling of barely sentient creatures. You know what the most amusing part is? Kella observed during a brief recess, her crystalline form sparkling with what appeared to be self-deprecating humor. We spent centuries convinced that we represented the pinnacle of evolutionary achievement. Turns out we were the primitives all along. Not primitives, Maya Torres said, appearing beside them with that uncanny human ability to move silently despite having only one arm. Just traditional, set in your ways, comfortable with familiar patterns. She gestured toward the bustling amphitheater where hundreds of species were engaged in productive governance activities. The difference between primitive and advanced is not technology or age or size. It is adaptability. Willingness to change when change produces better results. Ability to recognize when your assumptions are wrong and adjust accordingly. Nexus's skin shifted to a color that indicated deep contemplation. And humans excel at adaptability because you are forced to learn it early. We excel at adaptability because we have to, Maya corrected gently. When you are born with limitations, you either learn to work around them or you fail. When your species is small and weak compared to others, you either find creative solutions or you get dominated. When everyone underestimates you, you either prove them wrong or you accept their assessment. She smiled that dangerous smile that had become famous throughout the galaxy. Lucky for all of us, humans are remarkably bad at accepting other people's limitations. As Nexus watched Maya Torres walk back to the center of the amphitheater to continue running the most successful government in galactic history, she reflected on the final, ultimate irony of their situation. They had laughed at the one-armed human. Now she held the crown, and the galaxy had never been better for it.